WCW versus NWO World Tour is one of the games that I missed out on when I was younger. My friends and I didn't watch WCW, and I don't remember hearing anything about this game. I vaguely remember playing one of the WCW games on the N64, but could not tell you if it was this or Revenge. I'm looking forward to this one because after playing it, I was really kind of upset that we didn't play it when I was a kid. Mostly we just played the PS1 wrestling games and nothing from WCW. There is no career mode or story mode in this game. You do have the theme of WCW fighting the NWO, but you also have a couple of international rosters here, which is just a product of the game that this was based on. It's fine. I like it quite a bit, so yeah, I'm not really worried that there's not a story in it, and also it was pretty common for wrestling games to not have stories in them at this time. As far as the gameplay goes, everything in this is really easy to do, and it feels pretty good playing it. After suffering through some of the bad WCW games, this one was like a breath of fresh air. The game just feels fun to play. That's probably the best way I can put it. I like the gameplay quite a bit in this. It's much better than the other N64 games that I've played so far. Granted, I haven't really gotten into some of the really good wrestling games. It's mostly just been kind of the stuff that I've already played before, so going through something like this was a lot of fun. Here are a list of the few of the game modes. You have a WCW versus NWO mode, which is really just a Survivor Series match. They call it something else, but it's a Survivor Series match. Then you have an exhibition, a round robin, and then a couple of league matches, which are just another version of a round robin. You can also kind of expand this out into tag team matches, so you don't just have to do a singles mode. You can play a handicap match in a battle royal mode. There are also some weapons matches. There's a decent amount of variety in here, and it was really refreshing to play this after suffering through WCW Backstage Assault. That was pretty terrible. Like I mentioned, there are 4 groups of wrestlers you can choose from. I have no idea who the 2 international rosters are, or if they're based on other promotions, or anything like that. So please feel free to fill me in on the comments. I was a little confused about those. It's kind of how I felt when I played WCW vs. the World, and I just didn't know who a lot of the other wrestlers were, or who they were based on. I will say the roster's pretty great. There are a few that I would have liked to have seen in the game, but it's not really that big of a deal. And back in 97, I wouldn't have had a problem with it. It's only now in retrospect where I'm like, oh, it would have been cool to see these other people in the game. This is a great game. I wish I had played it back in 97, as I probably would have enjoyed it quite a bit. Maybe I would have gotten an N64 for it, but yeah, it would have been nice to have played it, or at least had my friends rent it, and maybe we would have started watching WCW after playing this. I have no idea. There are so many great games that I missed out on, both on the N64 and on the PS1, that it's kind of cool to go back and revisit them like this, because, yeah, there are a ton of games out there, and there was just no way for anybody to really play all of them. I think this game looks a little bit better than WCW vs. the World on the PS1. World Tour was released a year after that game. Even though their North American release dates are fairly close, the Japanese release dates are a year apart. There's probably a story behind this, but I'm not really going to get into it. That's beyond the scope of what I want to talk about. World Tour is a little blocky. The faces don't really look great, and the audience is a bit of a mess. I don't really know what the hell is going on with that. It's weird. These are only problems as I look back at the game, and I probably would not have had an issue with these in 97. I think the game looks pretty good for the time. It's not like a technical masterpiece or anything. It's not going to blow anyone away, but I think it looks fine. The textures are actually smoother than some of the other 3D wrestling games that I've played, It's not too bad, but it's definitely not great. I think the wrestler models look pretty good, especially for the time. I don't really have anything to complain about them. It's a pretty good looking N64 game. That's probably the best thing that I can say about it. I only have like one minor issue with the game, and that's that there are no ring entrances for the wrestlers. You just sort of show up in the ring. This isn't a big issue, but when you see other games do it and it looks fairly good or at least competent, and then you come to a game that you think is better and you don't see the ring entrances, it's something that you just have to point out. It would have been nice if they had done something like that with in-game graphics, where you at least have the wrestlers walk down to the ring. Looking back at the game now, the graphics are a little dated. This is something that I said about WCW vs. the World on the PlayStation, and it's pretty much the same here on the N64. It's not a spectacular looking game. The graphics are a little dated when you look at the character models, and also the crowd that just gets more distracting as I look at it. But I wouldn't say that the visuals are awful or that they really impact the gameplay. I think they're fairly decent, and back in '97 they would have looked pretty good. I took 4 reviews for this game, and yeah, I just wanted to see what people thought of at the time. These are all from 1997 and 1998, and then I think one is from the 2000s, like the early 2000s. The internet makes it a little hard to see when the original article was really published at times, but the date on one of these articles is from the year 2000, so yeah, that's when I'm assuming it was published. I looked at reviews from Nintendo Power, N64 Magazine, GameSpot, and IGN. The review scores are a little surprising, especially when you read through them and see what the reviewers actually thought. I do need to point out that at this time, a 5 was considered average and a 7 was considered to be a good game. That seems to hold true for these reviews at times when I do actually look at them. Nintendo Power gave it the highest score with a 79 out of 100. This was based on the aggregate score of 5 reviewers. One reviewer didn't like the game all that much and gave it like a 6.9 that kind of tanked the score for a lot of these, but it didn't do enough to really impact it. The person still liked it, but just didn't like it as much as the others. Because I think somebody gave it a 9, and then there was one that was in the 7s that was closer to what the score ended up being. So yeah, it was a pretty cool review to read through. I kind of like these old Nintendo Power reviews. They didn't like everything about the game. The sound was really the only thing that they just thought wasn't very good, and that was pretty much the same opinion that every reviewer had. But they pretty much praised everything else. Even the person who didn't like it that much didn't impact the score, at least on everything, to drive it down below a 7. While giving the game a 70 out of 100, N64 Magazine was pretty harsh in their review. At times it comes across like the reviewer just really wanted to trash the game, but couldn't find a real reason to do so. He called the game slow and quite often tedious, which I found pretty unfair. It just didn't really match the experience that I had, and maybe he played it more than I did, or maybe he just doesn't like this type of game. But it was kind of weird. I think the score isn't too far off, but I just thought that the reviewer really wanted to give it a lower score, especially after reading through many of the things that he said about it. GameSpot gave it the lowest score. They gave it a 5.9 out of 10. The verdict was that this was a rental game, and the reviewer points out some things that I just didn't experience while I was playing it. He calls the controls unresponsive and sluggish, and then mentions how you need to learn how to time the moves, which, I mean, sure, but I never really had a problem with any of this. This is the one review on here that I just don't agree with anything that the person said, because it really came across as strange going through this. Like, they played an entirely different game than the one that I played. In a mostly positive review, IGN gave me a strange line in the verdict section, which just felt odd. The first line under his verdict was, "If you don't like wrestling games, there's no point to this game," which honestly came across as something that he should be telling his therapist and not really putting in a game review. I mean, you could say that about any video game. If you don't like an RPG, then there's no point to the one that you're playing, or if you don't like fighting games, then there's no point to them. It just felt like a very strange thing to say, and a very strange thing to write in your review. At times, reading this one, it just felt like someone who doesn't like wrestling games wrote it. It was very odd. I really hope that this doesn't come across like I'm picking on these reviewers. Some of these are just really strange when you go back and you look at what people wrote about this game at the time, and then you play it for yourself, and it just doesn't really match up. I find it really interesting to read these, and they probably didn't expect anybody to come back and read them 20 or 25 years after they were written. I thought this game was really good. It's easy to learn, and it's pretty fun to play. The only thing I can really fault the game for are just the dated graphics, which really is only an issue in retrospect. They would have been just fine for 97, and they don't really impact the game all that much. It's got good animations, the moves are all easy to do, they look very good, the character models are a little blocky, but that's not really a huge deal. And it also would have been nice if there was a create a wrestler mode in this. And it would have been better if there were ring entrances as well, but that's just me getting down to like nitpicks at this point. I really would have enjoyed this game, I think, back in 1997. It's a little strange playing this game for the first time now, which is something that I could say about all of the N64 wrestling games and many of the N64 games, because it's stuff that I just don't have a connection to, and I'm only going back and playing them because I thought this would be a cool project to play through all the wrestling games that, are on the different systems and just try to rank them and see where they are. Thanks to a few different series on YouTube, I've kind of been able to find out what happened in WCW when I wasn't paying attention, so yeah, it's kind of fun to go back and get a little nostalgia for the 90s and see what was going on in a wrestling program that I didn't watch, and then experience the wrestling games that I never really played. So yeah, it's been fun so far. I think WCW versus NWO World Tour is pretty fun. I liked it quite a bit. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.